Alright everyone, I am here to give you my Monday Night War video. At least every week I think on the network they play the Monday Night War series when it was the WWF World Wrestling Federation won by Vince McMahon versus WCW World Championship Wrestling won by Ted Turner. And I originally was gonna start doing this every Tuesday. 2 weeks ago I gave you one, but what happened? Last week I was doing like a Walking Dead marathon on my other channel, reviewing The Walking Dead. And if you want to see those Walking Dead reviews, go subscribe to Own the Talkinator. So I was doing that, and I never really got the opportunity to sit down and watch it. You know, it would have taken too long because then I wouldn't have been able to watch Walking Dead. So, I'm here to give it to you now, though. And this one focused more on the WCW side because it was called The Rise of the NWO. Well, I think it was, I don't know if it was the NWO or NWO, but it was one of those. And I think it's called The Rise of NWO. NWO, it was a group. And I'm not going to leave the name who's in it because it will tell you. And it stood for New World Order. So they were talking about how the Monday Night Wars were like the greatest thing ever. But in the beginning there were some flaws. WWF had flaws and WCW had flaws. WWF's flaws were they were giving up characters that nobody cared about. Like Joint the Clown, a dumpster. What else? Hillbillies. You know, they were giving like cartoony characters. Triple H was Horace Helmsley that no one cared about. You know, no one cared about his characters. He was putting up some new superstars, new generation, new main eventers like Bret the Hitman Hart, the 1-2-3 Kid or X-Pac or Six, whatever that name was in WCW. Shawn Michaels, you know, they were putting up those new stars, but they were just coming out with cartoony feuds and cartoony characters, like a clown. Like that's so cartoony, Doink the Clown. And Kane was Isaac Yankem. Isaac Yankem's Kane now. Who else? It was just a lot of corny characters. So then what happens is, but on the WCW side of things, it felt like it was just kind of like an 80s show, an 80s wrestling show, because you had Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, Nature Boy Ric Flair, all the guys that were there and that were in the WWF in the 80s were in WCW, so it was pretty much like watching the whole thing all over again. They didn't like that. So, some things started changing, though, when WCW took all of Vince's top talents that he was going to push, like Lex Luger, among others. They started pushing these two new guys. Diesel, who was Kevin Nash, and Razor Ramon, who was Scott Hall. And they actually talked in this documentary. And they were talking about how they were in this character, they were liking the spot they were in. Kevin Nash pretty much was in the main event spot, and Razor Ramon was in the Intercontinental Championship spot. And they were liking where they were going. They were going on a good path with the WWF. They weren't really, mad about anything. So then, Eric Bischoff jumped on the deal and offered, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall spots on the lost contracts, and it was like $300 or something like that for only having to work 120 days a year. But if you wanted to get that much money in the WWF, you had to work like 300 days. It was a lot of money. I don't think it was that much, but I don't think the money was $300. But it was like it was a lot of money. So then they didn't really want to leave just because they were happy with the spot, in the spot that they were in. But eventually, Kevin Nash tried to negotiate with Vince and asked, why can't we just, asked if he could have the same deal with Vince's contract, or if he could offer him better. But Vince McMahon said that if he did that, he'd have to do it for, pretty much other people on the roster, so we can't do that. He even talked about, too, how he's never home, never sees his wife and stuff like that. And he considered the WWF his family, but Kevin Nash his wife was 6 months pregnant. And he needed to think about his family, so he took the deal with WCW, and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall went to WCW. And that started everything. He started the whole, that's pretty much started the Outsider storyline when they would jump, when they kept invading WCW. And Scott Hall came out during a match and even talked on the mic and said he's going to pretty much invade the show and he's going to have someone help him out. And Eric Bischoff was like, oh yeah, who do you got? Who do you got? And I forgot to mention too that at first Kevin Nash and Scott Hall didn't want to go to WCW because they were in WCW before. They didn't go out well. They had characters that flopped. Like Kevin Nash had a Oz character that didn't go as well. So So they want to go to WCW for that reason. But it worked out. Obviously you know that Scott Hall was invading the show. And Kevin Nash, he talked about how he had other people. And Kevin Nash, you hear that famous line, so this is where the big boys play, huh? We ain't here to play. And Eric Bischoff said this works so well because the internet wasn't that strong. Like, it literally, I could probably go on a wrestling site and see, like, for example, if they were around now, I probably would have known a lot. Like, people would have known that Kevin Nash and Scott Hall would have signed with WCW already. So, it would have been spoiled. We would have already known. But since the internet wasn't that strong, they still thought they were with the WWF. The WWF was just sending them over there to have this war, so they thought it was like the WWF versus WCW war. And Kevin Nash thought that Eric Bischoff wasn't getting it, that it didn't make any sense to him. And he thought it was working just because it was WCW, but he was like, no, it's working because we're former WWF guys, and they would invade the show with like baseball bats. They watched a match while eating soda and popcorn. They would invade the show, and everyone was liking it. Even Kelvin Sullivan was talking about how nobody knew what they were going to do. It made the show more realistic because Eric Bischoff wanted to go with like realistic storylines instead of cartoony, corny storylines like the WWF was going with. And it worked out really well. They would come out with baseball bats, and police would have to scan the ring. Police were pretty much out there all the time. Sting would get in Scott Hall's face and slap him. It really worked out well. It actually helped out the ratings too. The Outsiders really helped out the ratings. Like, it was like a 3.3 rating to like a 2.9 rating, I think, like for WCW. Though the WCW was beating WWF, and then they were talking, but then they were talking about a third guy, and if you see, and whoever, and they were talking about how Hash and Null, well, actually, too, I should mention, Vince McMahon ended up suing I think WCW because he thought that they were using like their names and like these were like their guys and no one knew that yet. So he sued them. So they came out clean that they weren't WWE guys. They don't work for anyone. They're free agents. And then Kevin Nash jackknife powerbomb, which he botches all the time. Eric Bischoff like through the stage. And then they were doing well, Hall and Nash. And then we had a guy, Hulk Hogan, who had come to WCW, as I talked about in the last video. And he was doing fine at first, but eventually everybody started hating Hulk Hogan. Everyone was turning on Hulk Hogan because he was the same gimmick pretty much, I think, since like the 80s. He was the eat your vitamins, say your prayers, and stuff like that. He pretty much was the same baby face. He had the same character for too long, so it ran his course. And Eric Bischoff even said, and Kevin Sullivan says, it's time to turn this guy heel. We have to turn him heel because you're just getting old. And he even brought up a good point that there was a guy named The Undertaker who's supposed to be dead. That's a baby face. So that proves that wrestling's starting to change. It's not this little kid stuff anymore. And Hulk Hogan didn't really want to go with it. But then there was talk that this group between Hall and Nash, who they were calling themselves the Outsiders, we're going to get a third guy. There was this big talk about a third guy, and originally Sting was supposed to be that third guy. It was originally supposed to be Sting, but then Hulk Hogan called up Eric Bischoff and said, hey, I'll be a bad guy, and I'll be the third guy with Hall and Nash if I can be a Hollywood Hulk Hogan, because he was doing stuff. He was shooting like movies and stuff like that. And they agreed with it, and they went with it. Bash at the Beach, 1996. It was there was like the third guy. It's supposed to be the third guy in like this match. It was Hall and Nash versus Sting. I think Lex Luger and Macho Man Randy Savage. Hulk Hogan was going to come out and save Macho Man Randy Savage. And then that was the big turn. He hit the leg drop, and it was a big moment for that match. And they talk about how he knew that people were going to start throwing garbage in the ring, and that it was that instant change, and people like The Miz, Ryback, and Kofi Kingston were talking about how they were shocked. I think Brodus Clay talked about it for a little bit. Hulk Hogan was like the big face of the WWE. No one ever thought he could go bad. He was always good, and he turned heel, and it was a big shock, and got people talking, and it made people started to become interested in Hulk Hogan. And me and Gene Okerlund talked about how people were already starting to hate Hulk Hogan, but now they had a reason to hate Hulk Hogan. And then he switched to the Hollywood character. Now he started wearing. He switched from red and yellow to black and white. And the NWO started. That was the start of the NWO. And it was good shit. Eventually, they just started, they did realistic stuff, too, they talk about, because they wanted to take them, like, through the backstage stuff, with, to go into the production truck, when Hall and Nash went into the production truck, and by taking people out backstage, it was good stuff, and, I liked it. Well, I liked what hearing about it. And Hulk Hogan being a bad guy worked, and they said that if it was Sting, it wouldn't have worked just because the NWO was supposed to be former WWF guys, and Hulk Hogan was in the WWF, and so were Hall and Nash, so it worked. I think it worked too, just because of that heel turn. It was epic. No one, I think Hulk Hogan probably would have stayed the same and would have been the same Hulk Hogan he always has been. So it wouldn't, if it made a positive. It had that epic heel turn, and that no one will ever forget. It was a good call to have Hulk Hogan be the third guy instead of Sting. It was a good business move. And then people from the WWF former WWF guys started joining the New World Order, except the Big Show. He was just in WCW then, so he was called the Giant. He joined. The $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, joined. The 1-2-3 Kid joined. Virgil joined. a lot of people were joining the WCW. It was a bunch of former WWF guys joining the WCW, joining NWO, and it was like this big WWF versus WCW war, and it was good stuff. And they even talked about that scene backstage when Hall and Nash were just taking everybody out, and Rey Mysterio tried to hit a crossbody on Nash, but he threw him right into the production truck. And one of them got injured, I forget who, and people were like calling 911 because they thought it was so real, because people thought this was real. They didn't really know what was a storyline or what was real. This was like a big storyline, and they were talking about how it wasn't just like a wrestling-based storyline. This was WCW's own thing. NWO was WCW's creation. So I thought that was some good stuff. And then it has Macho Man Randy Savage chasing, getting on top of the limousine and trying to chase Hall and Nash out of there and beat the crap out of him. But then eventually, people were starting to hate on this. People backstage, because the NWO would always bury the guys in the locker room, like Chris Jericho, Macho Man Randy Savage, Lex Luger. So they would just end up joining the NWO anyways, so that way they couldn't get their asses kicked. So because it showed a clip of Macho Man Randy Savage getting attacked, and then he ended up joining the group. You know, it was just kind of like how it was. So I thought that was interesting. It got some heat on the back. So now we're going to switch over to the WWF standpoint for a little bit, and they talked about how they weren't really doing well in the ratings either. Like, once Hulk Hogan joined the NWO, people tuned in. And that's, I think, another reason why it was a better move than Sting, because I think it was all about ratings. And if it made better ratings for Hulk Hogan to join the NWO and become like the lead. And I forgot to mention too, Eric Bischoff joined the NWO, and he was like the leader of the NWO, and it made perfect sense because he was like the producer and he was the leader, and it was all awesome stuff. But then they had they announced that Diesel and Razor Ramon were going to return, and technically, since Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, since they didn't leave the company because it was just Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and the WWF owned those names, they announced they couldn't return, and Jim Ross kept hyping them up, saying that Diesel and Razor Ramon are returning tonight. And people backstage in WCW were like, even Kevin Nash was talking about this, and he was like, they were getting suspicious, thought they were doing something wrong. So then they ended up giving them like a 3-year contract with more money, which they took. I mean, who wouldn't take that? But then eventually we find out, they were watching on the monitor backstage, that it was a fake Diesel and a fake Razor Ramon. It was pretty obvious. The fake Diesel, I know, was played by Kane. I don't know who the fake Razor Ramon was played as by. And it didn't really work. Everyone booed the crap out of it. It does look bad anyways. And Daniel Bryan even said that was a bad business move. No one bought that. No one really wanted to see that. So, no one really wanted to see that. Only Scott Hall and Kevin Nash could play the Diesel and Razor Ramon characters. So it didn't really work out the way they wanted it to. And then they went into WCW too. Razor Ramon, Scott Hall would still play the Razor Ramon gimmick by talking like Razor Ramon, having that toothpick in his mouth. Which in the documentary too, he had a toothpick in his mouth when he was talking in the documentary. So that doesn't really mean anything. Something tells me that's just like his stick. He always has a toothpick in his mouth no matter what. So then, back to the WCW side of things. The fans were really starting to become hooked with the NWO. Everyone was buying the merchandise in football games and basketball games. Hulk Hogan said he would see like a part of it when it was all black and white. People would like spray paint it on the back of their heads. Everyone loved the NWO. They would buy their merchandise, and it was good stuff. You know, they were bad guys, but loved at the same time. And Chris Jericho even said, well, if they're bad guys, then turn them face. Well, you can't really turn the NWO face. It wouldn't make any sense. So then what happened was, they even got their own pay-per-view, I think. They even did a video vignette because they talk about how NWO wanted to take over WCW and completely just call it NWO instead. You know, it's spray painted on people's backs on the WCW Championship. They spray painted it on the production truck. They spray painted NWO everywhere. And even Hulk Hogan, no. And then you talked about how, but then they talked about how they even got their own pay-per-view, which was awesome. You know, because in the ring, it even said NWO on it instead of WCW, and they even had like these black and white vignettes where it was like back in the old days movies, which was good. So this was it was becoming some good shit. And eventually, WWF, they talked about, was starting to become more edgier. They were trying to keep up with WCW, not stay out of business, by having DX, which consisted of Triple H, Shawn Michaels, the New Age Outlaws, which consisted of the Road Dogg, Jesse James, and the Badass Billy Gunn. Chyna, Ravishing Rick Rude was in it for a little bit. And X-Pac. Or 123 Kid, or 6, or whatever his name was in WCW. And they talk about how they were starting to get more edgy stuff when they did the I have like a small wiener bit, and they talk about how they have a big stick and it showed like a salami, and when they did the hot wiener, there was a hot dog. So then, yeah, it was starting to become more edgier. It was the birth of Stone Cold Steve Austin. And they're going to try to catch up in the ratings, you know, just to keep from there. Because WCW, throughout mid-1996 and, like, going into 1997, in the ratings, was kicking the WWF's ass. So, that's kind of it. I know this was a lot of jumping around, but, you know, I tried to keep in touch. But, this was good. I liked this documentary. To get to hearing about the NWO and how exactly it was created. I knew about it, but I didn't know some things about it, so I like that. And it was good stuff. Like I said, the NWO was probably one of the greatest factions ever, just because the NWO pretty much really started the war between WCW. The NWO took WCW to the top. So I thought that was good stuff. And the NWO also made the WWF try more. And they even had like NWO and WWF and DX. So it was good stuff. I liked it. So that's my thoughts on the Monday Night Wars. I'm now going to make a playlist, which you're going to see in a few minutes, of the of the Monday Night Wars. And I'll be back next week to give you another one. Because if I ever miss one, I want to mention... it's not like on the Own the Talkinator channel where if I missed the Walking Dead review, I can review it too. And these are really long. This one was like about 2 hours. Like it said 2 hours. Like it was long. And I just didn't really feel like, doing it. So next week I will be back to do another one of these. I don't really know which one they're going to do next. But we'll see. But that's pretty much it, guys. Subscribe to my channel and all the stuff down below. And I'll see you when I see you.